The battlefield was already supposed to be dead. The German command believed this sector had been cleared hours ago. According to reports, resistance had collapsed. The enemy was either dead, captured, or running. The map showed nothing more than a thin line of trees, a shattered farmhouse, and a shallow ridge that meant nothing to armored units. Infantry columns were ordered forward, confident, almost bored. This was supposed to be a routine advance, another quiet push through broken ground toward total control. But wars do not end when commanders say they do. Wars end when the last man decides to stop fighting. And in this forgotten stretch of earth, one gunner had not moved. He lay pressed into the dirt behind a ruined stone wall, the kind built generations earlier by farmers, who never imagined it would become cover in a modern war. His uniform was soaked with sweat and dust. His hands blistered raw from hours of firing and reloading. Around him were the signs of a battle that should not still be happening. Spent shell casings, torn equipment, dark stains in the soil that marked where men had fallen and would not rise again. He had been told to withdraw. He had been ordered to fall back. But he stayed. Because beyond that ridge, the road opened straight into friendly territory. Because behind him were medics, wounded men, supply trucks, and units that would not survive an armored breakthrough. Because sometimes a war narrows down to a single position, and whoever holds it decides the fate of hundreds. The Germans advanced cautiously at first. A squad moved forward in formation, rifles at the ready, scanning for threats that intelligence insisted no longer existed. Then the first man fell. No warning, no shouted command, just a sharp crack and a body collapsing into the dirt as if the ground had suddenly given way beneath him. The rest froze, trained soldiers suddenly unsure of what they were facing. Another shot rang out. Another man dropped. Panic rippled through the formation as they scrambled for cover. That wasn't there. They had walked into a killing zone controlled by one gunner. From behind his shattered wall, he worked with mechanical precision. He did not waste ammunition. He did not fire wildly. Each shot was deliberate, calculated, chosen. He shifted position slightly after every burst, knowing return fire would come, knowing survival depended on never being exactly where the enemy expected him to be. The Germans pulled back, confused and angry. This was not supposed to happen. A platoon was sent next, supported by machine guns. They advanced more aggressively, pouring fire into the rubble, trying to crush whatever resistance remained through sheer volume. The wall exploded into fragments. Dust filled the air. Shrapnel tore through the ground inches from the gunner's face. Still he did not move. He waited. When their fire paused, just for a second, he rose and fired again. The machine gun team was silenced before they could reposition. Men shouted. Orders overlapped. The advance collapsed into chaos as bodies piled up in a place that was supposed to be safe. By now, the German officers knew something was wrong. This was not a unit. This was not a defensive line. This was one man, and he was stopping an army. Reports flowed up the chain of command, each one more unbelievable than the last. An entire advance delayed, multiple casualties, no clear enemy count. Some officers suspected exaggeration, others suspected incompetence. A few, the experienced ones, suspected something far more dangerous. A defender with skill, patience, and nothing left to lose. The decision was made quickly. If infantry could not break him, armor would. Orders were issued to bring up a Tiger tank. The Tiger was not just a tank, it was a message. Its armor was thick enough to ignore small arms fire. Its main gun could turn buildings into dust with a single shot. Its presence alone often ended resistance before a single round was fired. Against one gunner, it was supposed to be overwhelming. As the engine roared to life and the massive vehicle began its slow advance, German confidence returned. No man could stand against steel. No position could survive its firepower. Whatever had delayed them would be erased in minutes. The ground trembled as the Tiger approached. From his position, the gunner felt it before he saw it. The vibrations rolled through the earth, through the stone beneath his elbows, through his chest. He knew that sound. Everyone did. It was the sound of inevitability, the sound that usually meant retreat or death. He had neither option. His ammunition was running low. His body was exhausted. His ears rang constantly from hours of gunfire. And now, the most feared weapon on the battlefield was being sent specifically for him. He did not panic. Instead, he studied the terrain. The shallow ridge, the angle of the road, the soft ground near the tree line where heavy armor could bog down. the narrow arc the Tiger's turret would have to traverse to target his position. He understood something the tank crew did not, that tanks were powerful, but not invincible, and that arrogance killed faster than bullets. As the Tiger crested the ridge, sunlight flashed across its armor. Infantry followed behind it, using the massive hull as moving cover. They believed the fight was already over. The gunner adjusted his grip. He was no longer thinking about orders or survival or even victory. He was thinking about time. Every second he delayed them was another second for reinforcements to arrive. Another second for wounded men to be evacuated. Another second stolen from an enemy that believed it could not be stopped. The Tiger fired its first shell. The wall disappeared in a cloud of smoke and debris. Stone fragments tore into the earth. The shockwave knocked the gunner flat, driving the air from his lungs. For a moment, everything went silent except for the ringing in his ears. The Germans assumed that was the end of it. They were wrong. From the smoke, gunfire erupted again. Closer now, more precise. Infantry began to fall as the gunner repositioned, using the chaos created by the tank's own fire. The Tiger's turret began to rotate, slow and deliberate, struggling to track a target that refused to stay still. This was no longer a simple elimination. It was a duel, one man against the most feared tank of the war. And the outcome was no longer certain. The Tiger's turret continued to swing, metal grinding against metal, as the crew fought to lock onto a target that refused to behave, like a normal enemy. Through the periscope, the gunner inside the tank saw only dust, shattered stone, and brief flashes of movement that vanished the instant he adjusted his aim. This was not how armor engagements were supposed to go. Tanks were meant to dominate space, to erase resistance from a distance. Yet here they were, stalled by something they could not clearly see. Behind the tank, German infantry hesitated. They had trusted the Tiger to solve the problem. Now they found themselves trapped between advancing was impossible, and retreat was unthinkable. Each time they tried to move, shots snapped past them, precise and unforgiving. Men hugged the ground, pressing their faces into dirt that offered no protection. Every second spent waiting felt longer than the last. The gunner had shifted again. He was no longer using the ruined wall. It no longer existed. Instead, he crawled through a shallow depression carved by old artillery fire, dragging his weapon with him, moving inch by inch while the Tiger's attention remained fixed on the wrong place. His breathing was controlled, shallow, deliberate. Panic would waste oxygen. Panic would waste time. He understood something critical. The Tiger's strength was also its weakness. Its gun could destroy buildings, but it could not fire everywhere at once. Its armor was thick, but its vision was narrow. And its crew, confident in steel, had grown careless. A burst of fire cut down 2 infantrymen who had tried to flank left. Another burst forced the rest back into cover behind the tank. The Tiger fired again, the shell screaming overhead and detonating harmlessly behind the gunner's new position. The explosion showered him with dirt, but he did not flinch. He had already moved. Inside the tank, frustration turned into anger. The commander barked orders, demanding infantry push forward, demanding suppression fire, demanding results. But shouting did not change reality. The infantry could not advance without being cut down, and the tank could not see what it needed to kill. Time, the one thing the German advance could not afford to lose, was slipping away. The gunner checked his ammunition. It was dangerously low. Every shot now carried weight far beyond its size. He could not win by killing everyone. He could only win by delaying, by confusing, by forcing the enemy to waste time and make mistakes. His objective was no longer to destroy. It was to survive long enough to matter. He waited for the Tiger to commit. When it did, it was subtle. The tank began to move forward, slow and confident, grinding over rubble as if daring the unseen enemy to try something foolish. Infantry followed close, believing proximity to the tank made them untouchable. The ground near the tree line darkened as the heavy vehicle rolled onto softer soil. That was the moment. The Tiger's left track dipped slightly, sinking more than expected. Not enough to stop it, but enough to slow it. Enough to force a correction. Enough to steal momentum. The gunner fired again, not at the tank, but at the men protecting it. The formation broke instinctively, soldiers scattering to avoid fire, abandoning the tight screen that kept the Tiger safe. The tank was alone. Its turret swung hard, overcorrecting. The main gun fired at a flash that no longer existed, the recoil rocking the vehicle and digging it deeper into the soft ground. The crew did not realize it yet, but they were losing freedom of movement. The most dangerous thing that can happen to armor in hostile territory. The gunner repositioned once more, every muscle screaming in protest. His hands shook from fatigue, but his mind remained clear. He could hear the Tiger's engine straining now. The sound slightly different, heavier, angrier. Machines like men revealed weakness under pressure. German officers watching from the rear could hardly believe the reports coming in. A single position still holding, a Tiger delayed, casualties mounting. What was supposed to be a clean advance had turned into a nightmare of uncertainty. They ordered more infantry forward. Those men would never reach him. The gunner's fire cut into them the moment they broke cover. Not rapid, not reckless, surgical. Each fall slowed the rest. Each hesitation bought another precious second. Smoke filled the air, kicked up by tank fire and burning debris, turning the battlefield into a shifting maze of shadows and sound. The Tiger tried to reverse. Its engine roared louder, tracks biting into mud and stone, but the ground resisted. The movement was slow, painfully slow. In war, slow meant vulnerable. The infantry, now too scattered to provide proper cover, could not protect it from an enemy they still could not see. The gunner knew this was the peak of the moment. If he failed now, there would be no second chance. He steadied himself, ignoring the pain, ignoring the exhaustion, ignoring the certainty that survival beyond this point was unlikely. His world had narrowed to angles, timing, and distance. Nothing else existed. Another shot, then another. German movement stalled completely. The advance had stopped. Not because of a minefield, not because of an airstrike, not because of a fortified line, but because one man refused to disappear. And somewhere behind him, unseen and unheard, friendly forces were moving closer. The delay was working. The battlefield had reached a strange, unnatural pause. The kind that only comes when both sides sense that something irreversible is about to happen. Smoke drifted low across the ground, blurring shapes and swallowing sound, while the Tiger sat half-sunken in the churned earth, its engine growling in frustration rather than dominance. For the first time since it had entered the fight, the tank was no longer advancing. It was waiting. Inside the steel hull, the crew felt it too. The driver kept his hands tight on the controls, adjusting pressure, trying to coax movement out of tracks that refused to grip properly. The gunner scanned left and right through limited vision. His eyes strained, his nerves frayed, jumping at every shadow. The commander, once confident, now leaned forward, searching desperately for the enemy that continued to humiliate them. They had been trained for battles against other tanks, against fortified lines, against known threats, not against an invisible gunner who bent the flow of battle through patience alone. The gunner watched all of it. From his new position near the tree line, partially concealed by broken branches and smoke, he observed the Tiger not as a monster, but as a machine under stress. He could see the subtle rocking as the engine revved, the slight delay between turret movement and gun alignment, the hesitation that revealed uncertainty. He understood that fear did not only belong to infantry. Crews felt it too, trapped inside steel, blind beyond narrow slits, relying on instruments and assumptions that could betray them. His ammunition was nearly gone. The weight of that reality pressed on him harder than any shell explosion. He counted rounds without looking, feeling each one as a promise that would soon expire. Every shot now had to achieve more than a kill. It had to shape behavior. It had to influence decisions. It had to force mistakes. The German infantry attempted one last coordinated push. This time they advanced cautiously, spread wide, using smoke grenades to mask their movement. The air thickened, turning the battlefield into a gray void, where shapes appeared and vanished without warning. It was a smart move, textbook, and under normal circumstances, it would have worked. But nothing about this situation was normal. The gunner fired into the smoke, not blindly, but guided by sound and instinct sharpened through hours of survival, boots scraping dirt, equipment clinking, shouted commands half swallowed by smoke. Each shot disrupted the advance, breaking cohesion, turning coordination into hesitation. Men slowed, then stopped. Unsure of where the threat truly was, the Tiger attempted to support them. Its machine guns opened up, stitching lines of fire through the haze, tearing branches from trees and shredding ground that no longer concealed anyone. The main gun fired again, the shell detonating too far forward, its blast impressive but meaningless. Firepower without precision wasted time, and time was the one thing the German force could not recover. The gunner shifted for the final time. He moved closer now, dangerously close, crawling through mud and debris, while the tank's attention remained fixed elsewhere. His muscles screamed. His lungs burned. But the closer he got, the less the tiger could see him. The tank's greatest strength, range, became irrelevant. From this distance, he could hear voices inside the hull, muffled but unmistakably human. He paused, not out of fear but calculation. The tiger tried once more to free itself, reversing hard, then forward again, the engine roaring at full power. The track spun, throwing mud and stones, digging deeper rather than escaping. The effort exposed the tank's vulnerability, its flanks turning slightly, its rear momentarily unprotected. The gunner acted. His fire was fast now, controlled but urgent. He targeted the infantry, attempting to regroup, forcing them to scatter again, leaving the tank isolated at the worst possible moment. Without support, the tiger became blind, deaf, and dangerously exposed. German command had had enough. Orders were sent to pull back temporarily, to regroup, to bring artillery or air support. But orders took time to reach the front, and time was something the battlefield no longer offered. Confusion reigned as units hesitated, some preparing to withdraw, others still attempting to push forward. That hesitation saved lives on one side. On the other, it sealed fate. In the distance, the faint sound of incoming fire could finally be heard, not German but friendly. The delay had done its job. The gunner recognized the sound immediately. Reinforcements were close enough to change everything. The Tiger crew heard it too. They knew then that the situation had slipped beyond control. What was meant to be a demonstration of power had become a trap. Their confidence, once absolute, drained away, replaced by the cold understanding that steel alone did not guarantee survival. The gunner remained in position, weapon ready, eyes fixed on the massive shape before him. The battle was not over, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The first shells from friendly artillery landed short, then closer, then finally where they were meant to, tearing into the space the German advance had tried so desperately to control. The ground shook in a way that was different from the Tiger's fire. This was not intimidation. This was correction. Explosions rolled across the battlefield in measured intervals, forcing the German infantry to scatter completely, their formations collapsing into instinctive survival rather than coordinated movement. The Tiger remained where it was. Its engine screamed as the driver pushed it beyond safe limits, trying one last time to break free from the ground that now held it like a vice. The track spun uselessly, metal grinding against mud and stone, producing noise without progress. Smoke poured from the exhaust, thick and dark, turning the tank into a beacon rather than a weapon. Inside the hull, panic finally replaced procedure. The commander shouted conflicting orders. The gunner swung the turret again and again, unable to settle on a target. The driver fought controls that no longer responded as they should. They had entered the battlefield as hunters. They now realized they were prey, not because of a superior machine, but because of a single defender who had rewritten the rules of engagement. The gunner watched the shift with grim clarity. He did not celebrate. He did not rush forward. He remained still, understanding that victory often came to those who waited through the final moments of danger. He had seen too many men fall because they believed the fight was over when it was not. His weapon was nearly silent now. Only a few rounds remained. But it no longer needed to speak loudly. German infantry began to withdraw in disorder. Some ran, some crawled, some dragged the wounded, glancing back repeatedly at the immobilized Tiger, as if unsure whether abandoning it was an act of survival or disgrace. Officers tried to restore order, but explosions and confusion swallowed their commands before they could take shape. Another artillery strike landed closer to the tank. The blast rocked the Tiger violently, its suspension straining, its armor ringing like a struck bell. The crew understood then what command already knew. Recovery was impossible. The tank could not be saved. Staying meant destruction. Leaving meant survival. Hatches opened. One by one, the crew emerged. Hands raised, movement slow and careful. No longer warriors inside steel, but men exposed to the same reality as everyone else on the battlefield. They stepped away from the machine that had promised them invincibility and found none. The gunner did not fire. He lowered his weapon slightly, eyes still alert, body still coiled for danger. But his task, the impossible task he had been given by circumstance, was complete. The road behind him was no longer open to an armored breakthrough. The wounded had time. Reinforcements had arrived. The line held. When friendly soldiers finally reached his position, they did not recognize him at first. He was covered in dust and grime, uniform torn, face streaked with sweat and soot. His hands shook now that the moment had passed. Exhaustion crashing down where adrenaline had carried him for hours. Around him lay the evidence of what one determined defender could do. The stalled advance, the abandoned tank, the scattered remnants of a force that had been certain of victory. Officers would later argue over reports. Some would exaggerate, some would downplay, some would reduce it to numbers and timelines and tactical summaries. But those who had been there understood the truth in a way no report ever could. An army had been stopped not by superior firepower, but by refusal. Refusal to retreat when retreat meant disaster. Refusal to disappear when disappearance was expected. Refusal to accept that steel and numbers alone decided wars. The gunner would not be famous in the way generals were famous. His name would not be carved into monuments large enough to be seen from a distance. But for the men who lived because he stayed, for the line that held because he refused to break, his impact would never fade. History often remembers battles as movements of divisions and machines. But sometimes, history turns on one position, one weapon, and one man who decides that this is where the enemy stops. That day, the German army learned a truth it would learn many times before the war was over. Even a tiger can be halted, and even one gunner can change everything. In the days that followed, the battlefield returned to silence. But it was not the peaceful kind. It was the heavy silence that lingers after something irreversible has occurred, when the land itself seems to remember what happened upon it. Burned earth, shattered trees, and the hulking shell of the abandoned tiger remained as mute witnesses. Engineers would later inspect it, noting the damage. The tracks torn by desperate effort, the marks left by artillery that arrived just in time. On paper, it would be logged as a lost vehicle. On the ground, it was something more. Proof that certainty could be defeated. The gunner was moved to the rear only after he slept for nearly an entire day. His body, finally released from the grip of necessity, collapsed into exhaustion so complete that medics initially worried he would not wake. When he did, he asked only one question: whether the road had held. When told it had, he closed his eyes again, satisfied, not seeking praise, not asking for recognition. For him, the fight had ended the moment the enemy advance stopped. Everything after that felt distant, unreal. Among the soldiers who arrived as reinforcements, the story spread unevenly. Some heard fragments: a lone defender, a stalled tank, an advance broken without explanation. Others heard exaggerations: dozens killed, impossible feats, a man who seemed more legend than human. The truth sat somewhere quieter in between, less dramatic but far more unsettling. That discipline, terrain, and refusal could bend even the most powerful force. German units that withdrew from the sector did so cautiously. They did not return quickly. Reconnaissance reports were double-checked. Advances were delayed. Armor was no longer sent forward without overwhelming infantry support. The memory of that stalled tiger infected. Decision-making far beyond that stretch of ground. Confidence, once lost, did not return easily. Commanders on both sides studied the engagement. Friendly officers noted how a single fixed point, held at the right time, could disrupt operations far beyond its apparent value. German officers noted something more troubling: that technological superiority created habits, and habits created blind spots. In training manuals and tactical discussions, the incident would be referenced indirectly, stripped of emotion, reduced to lessons learned. But no lesson fully captured what it felt like to be there. For the men who had followed the tiger forward, the memory never faded. Some remembered the sound of the engine struggling. Others remembered the moment they realized the tank was no longer protecting them. Many remembered the feeling of being watched, hunted by someone they could not see. They would carry that sensation into every future advance, a quiet tension tightening whenever the ground ahead seemed too empty. The gunner returned to duty weeks later. He was different, though no one could point to a single visible change. He spoke less. He listened more. In training, he emphasized patience, positioning, restraint. When younger soldiers asked him what it felt like to face a Tiger tank alone, he never answered directly. He only said that machines followed rules, and that understanding those rules mattered more than courage. The war moved on, as wars always do. New battles replaced old ones. New losses overshadowed previous victories. Maps changed, lines shifted, names were forgotten. Yet somewhere in the flow of that immense conflict, a small bend remained. A moment where the expected outcome failed to arrive on schedule. where time itself seemed to hesitate. That hesitation saved lives. Not all of them were counted. Not all of them were recorded. Some survived simply because a road was not breached when it should have been. Some lived because an ambulance passed through an area that would otherwise have been overrun. Some lived without ever knowing why. Years later, long after the uniforms were stored away and the ground reclaimed by grass, the story still surfaced occasionally. Not as a headline, not as a grand speech, but as a quiet example shared between soldiers, a reminder passed along in low voices that wars are not only decided by factories and numbers, but by moments where someone refuses to move. A Tiger tank had been sent to end resistance. Instead, it became a monument to its failure, and the gunner, unseen by history, unnamed by monuments, remained exactly what he had been that day on the battlefield. The point where the advance stopped. Time did what it always does after war. It blurred edges, softened facts, and allowed distance to reshape memory. The battlefield where the Tiger had stalled slowly lost its sharpness. In official records, grid references changed. Units rotated out. New maps replaced old ones. What had once been a focal point of fear and tension became just another anonymous stretch of land marked by faded coordinates and brief footnotes. Yet for those who had been there, the place never truly faded. The gunner rarely spoke of that day, but it followed him quietly. In moments of stillness, during long marches, sleepless nights, or the dull waiting that defined so much of war, fragments returned uninvited. The vibration of the ground beneath the tank, the delay between sound and impact, the way time stretched when every decision mattered. These memories did not arrive as pride. They arrived as weight. He understood something many never did. Survival in such moments did not feel heroic. It felt narrow, confined, almost mechanical. There was no room for grand emotion when every breath had to be measured. What remained afterward was not triumph, but responsibility, the unsettling knowledge that his choices had altered outcomes far beyond what he could see. New soldiers occasionally found their way to him. They did not know his name from records. They knew him through reputation, a man who had held a line, who had faced armor, who had done the impossible. They expected stories, filled with drama. What they received instead were lessons. He spoke about angles of fire, about how terrain dictated movement, about how waiting was often more powerful than acting. He warned them that confidence was louder than competence, and far more dangerous. Some listened, some did not. Those who listened survived longer. Across the lines, the German army adapted, but adaptation carried scars. The Tiger, once seen as a guarantee, was now treated with caution in similar terrain. Infantry spacing increased. Reconnaissance grew more deliberate. Advances slowed where they once surged. None of this was traced back to one gunner and official doctrine, yet the change was real. Fear rarely announces itself. It embeds quietly into procedure. The abandoned tank was eventually destroyed to prevent reuse. Explosives reduced it to twisted metal, erasing its physical presence from the field. But destruction did not erase memory. In some ways, it strengthened it. A tank destroyed by unseen pressure became more unsettling than one destroyed in open battle. It suggested vulnerability where none was expected. For the gunner, recognition came and went without ceremony. There was no parade, no speech written for newspapers. A brief commendation passed through administrative channels, stripped of detail, careful not to elevate a single individual above the machinery of war. He accepted it without comment. He understood the necessity of anonymity. Wars preferred symbols. He had been a moment. As the conflict dragged on, moments like his multiplied elsewhere. Different men, different terrain, different outcomes. Yet the pattern repeated, not always successfully, not always recorded. Individuals standing where collapse was expected, refusing to step aside. History would later compress these into trends and statistics. But on the ground they were lived as isolation. One man, one decision, one position that could not be abandoned. The gunner carried that understanding with him beyond the war. It shaped how he saw silence, how he interpreted hesitation, how he measured resolve in others. He never spoke about stopping an army. He spoke about holding long enough. To him, that was the only victory that mattered. Years later, when asked what the most powerful weapon on the battlefield had been, he did not mention the Tiger, artillery, or air support. He said it was time. Time denied to the enemy. Time given to the wounded. Time stolen from certainty. And he said that time was bought the same way it always was. By someone staying when leaving would have been easier. Sometimes, history doesn't turn because of grand strategies or massive armies. Sometimes it turns because one man refuses to move. A single gunner, a single position, and the most feared tank of the war and stopped cold. No speeches followed. No cameras rolled. Just a silent road that never fell, and lives that continued because it didn't. The Tiger was built to crush resistance. But that day, resistance had a name, even if history never wrote it down. Because wars are not always decided by who advances the fastest, but by who decides, this is as far as you go.